All right, this is Sam Sheffin with Fantasy Football Money League. I have our lead writer, Jason Mullins, on the line. Jason, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Sam.
All right, so let's get into it. For those that don't know, our website is fantasyfootballmoneyleague.com, and I'm going to take you there, and I'm going to show you each week. Jason's going to put out a weekly column called Mully's Money Picks, and he's going to give you the top picks for the GPP tournaments each week. GPP standing for Guaranteed Prize Pool, if you don't know. That means that no matter how many entries there are, you're guaranteed a prize pool. And there's a certain strategy for GPPs, and Jason, why don't you go into that strategy for a second and how you approach GPPs?
Well, like you said, it is a guaranteed prize, and obviously it's typically a much larger prize than you'll see in a lot of other contests. And with that larger prize means a larger pool of contestants. One benefit to these is that you can actually have multiple entries, so that changes your strategy a lot and allows you for a lot more creativity when you're creating your lineups. One thing that you're able to do is stack some players based on a good matchup, which we'll get into here a little bit later, based on some of the matchups we see this week. But also it gives you the ability to be a bit more contrarian, which if you read the strategy article, I go into contrarian picks and what they are. But in a nutshell, pick some players that maybe are primed to have a really successful week but aren't on everybody's radar, so they can kind of give you the inside edge to success.
All right, that's good. For those that don't know, Jason is a Fantasy Pros lead correspondent for the Indianapolis Colts. He's a season-long champ, and recently he got into daily fantasy and made a ton of money last year, so he's on board sharing his picks. So now I'm going to show you where those picks are located on the website. If you go to the website, you go to the top navigation, navigate to Mully's Money Picks, and the drop-down is Week 1, and you'll find his weekly article here, and that's what we're going to go through today. So let's get started. And Jason, why don't you talk about your system in this lineup, and just tell me a little bit about this article and what goes into it.
Well, each week I kind of approach every article with a theme or kind of a general thought process, and this week's theme I put into the form of a haiku, and I'll try to do that for you every week. So I'll go ahead and share that with you and just kind of start where my thought process just started with it. The haiku that we've got for this week, for week 1 of the fantasy football and real football season, is defense makes winners. Lack of D makes winners too, out of opponents. And what I mean there is it's week 1. We didn't really have a lot to go on. I mean, we've got last season's performances, we've got some preseason performances, but we didn't really know a lot about what we're going to have, what sort of production we're going to have, and how the offenses are really going to look against these first-unit defenses for an entire game. So based on that, what we do want to look at a little bit more specifically in this week is defense. And a team that has a favorable matchup with the defense, or somebody who has just historically given up a lot of fantasy points, that's probably somebody we may want to target a little more highly in week 1 than we may later on throughout the season. So that's one of the things that we took into consideration. And then another thing that I thought about was just how is the scheme? You have a lot of coaching changes and coaching moves throughout the offseason. You want to look at the scheme. What player acquisitions maybe tell us about what the team plans to do with certain players, how they're going to be utilized, and what kind of production we can see from them.
All right, great. I love week 1 because I feel like there's a ton of value out there if you're confident in what you're doing. These sites have just started setting their salaries. They don't have much to go on. There's some values in rookies out there. So I just feel like week 1, there's a lot of opportunity to really take advantage, and GPP is the place to do it. So let's get into it. Your first section of the article, you go into RBs. So let's talk about who's your must start. I know everyone talks about contrarian thinking when it comes to GPPs. You have to go against the flow in some way, but there's also some must starts, and we know that because last year if you hadn't started Jamal Charles against the Raiders and he went off for 5 TDs, you weren't going to win your GPP. So we know there's some of those guys out there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your RBs this week?
I really think for this week the must start is LaShawn McCoy. There's a little bit of concern with the newly acquired Darren Sproles and what kind of role he'll have, and I do think that may take a little bit of production away. I mean, he's not going to get a lot of rushing yards, but he is going to get some receptions out of the backfield. So, we may see McCoy utilized a little bit less in the passing game than maybe in the past, but we also have to consider that Deshaun Jackson's also gone this year, so there's going to be plenty of targets to go around. They've got a pretty decent matchup. I like them against Jacksonville. Jacksonville does look competitive enough to stay in the game at least, so they're going to have to keep that unit out there and try to keep putting points up on the board. So I really think McCoy, if you're looking for an elite running back, he's your guy this week.
All right. I also think it's either McCoy or Charles. I think you have to have one of those two in your lineups. McCoy, I agree. I think he's going to get a ton of touches. I also think that maybe Sproles it's overplayed a little bit, and I think that McCoy is not going to lack in touches. He's going to get his opportunities in the run game and still in the pass game as well. All right, let's talk about your tier 2. I see you dropped AP to the tier 2. What a lot of people don't understand is St. Louis, they were strong last year, but they weren't strong against the run. They gave up a ton of yards, a ton of TDs. So
True.
What are you looking for in tier 2?
Well, I do absolutely agree with that. But the one thing that kind of made me keep from putting him in tier 1 was the fact that it's uncertainty at quarterback. Now, granted, AP's overcome that before, and we've seen him do it for years and years now, but that run defense that you're talking about and giving up those yardage, obviously a lot of those other teams had a bit more going on in the passing game than what the Vikings do currently. It's not that I dislike AP. It's just, again, I'd like to see how that offensive unit works together. I'd like to see Cordarrelle Patterson, how they plan on utilizing him in the passing game this year and possibly on some tricky run plays as well. And again, you've got Matt Castle right now, but Teddy Bridgewater's waiting in the wings. So we've really got to see how that unit's going to kind of gel and come together before we really know what's going to happen. And that was the uncertainty that kept him out of the top tier for me this week.
And for those that haven't played GPPs before, you need some studs, but you also need value. And you really want to pay attention to this value tier. You're going to have to get 2 or 3 guys that are really cheap, their salary's really low, and they put out some nice production. In your value tier, Frank Gore really stands out to me. People have been fading him a bit, saying he's old and saying Carlos Hyde's going to come in. I don't think it's going to be week 1, and they've got a really nice matchup. Why'd you add him there?
Yeah, you basically hit the nail right on the head. That's exactly what I think. He does still have some gas in the tank, and an analogy that I used was we don't know how much gas that may be in the tank, but we know he at least has enough gas to make it through week 1. He may start petering out before the end of the season, and we do have a talented backup with Carlos Hyde waiting in the wings, but you're not going to see that play a factor this early in the season. So I think he's one of your safest value plays that you could possibly look for this week. Another guy that we've got down there that I like a lot is Pierre Thomas. You've got, again, Darren Sproles, who's now gone, and all of those touches out of the backfield, all of those the receptions. Pierre Thomas had 77 touches last year out of the backfield receiving. Now, to put that in perspective, you've also got Mark Ingram and Kyrie Robinson. I believe it was 24 overall receptions for the 2 of them. So obviously he's your passing down back, and he's the one that you want to have in that situation. We know they love to air it out there. He's going to get a ton of catches this year. I don't think that it would be anything too far a stretch of the imagination to think that he could actually break the 100 reception mark out of the backfield, which is crazy.
Yeah, for those that don't know, I'm an Atlanta Falcons fan through and through, so it's hard for me to take a Saints player, but I agree. I had Pierre Thomas last year in a few leagues, and he's a reception beast. It's a really heavy backfield, so it's tough for me because I feel like the Saints, you don't know who's going to get it week in, week out, but you know Pierre Thomas is going to get a few receptions, and pay attention to your scoring settings because on all of these daily sites, you get points for receptions. So with that PPR format, there's value there.
Absolutely.
All right. Going into your wide receivers and your tight ends, what do you normally look at, and how do you make those picks?
Well, that kind of goes, and especially we already talked about it a little bit, that kind of goes towards the matchup. I'm a big fan of stacking, and the reason behind that is because let's say that you feel confident that a quarterback is going to put up 200 to 300 yards that week. If he's got 2, maybe 3 competent targets, you can pretty much count on each one of those targets for close to or over 100 yards. So for that reason alone, I like to look at a team, a whole offensive unit, especially in a GPP, that I can pick each receiver or of the top 2 targets of the receiving core and the quarterback. So for that reason, that's kind of why I'm so high on Macklin this week because again they've got the good matchup and I like Foles a lot. We'll get to that a little bit later. And then also talking about that matchup for the Cowboys and Niners, I like all the Niners this week. So you've got Crabtree and Bolden that are right there for you, and then tight ends, which we'll get to a little bit later with Vernon Davis. So that weighs heavily when I'm looking at wide receivers especially.
And for those that don't know, stacking is when you stack players on the same team in your lineup. And the idea is that if you have a wide receiver and a quarterback that connect on a couple touchdowns, then you're going to see an increase in points, and that's your advantage over other players in the GPP. So it's a widely used technique. It's a matter. It's like all or nothing with stacking. I mean, if they have a bad day, you're pretty much losing the game. So, but that's what you need in a GPP. You need high risk, high reward
Right.
roster. So I really like Macklin as well. I think he's undervalued. I think he's going to lead the team in targets. He was the man before he went down. And they've got a lot of weapons. I think they're going to air it out. I like him as well. All right, who's your must-have wide receiver this week in the same vein? Or do you have a must-have? Or are you just stacking?
I don't really have a must-have. I'm kind of playing the matchups. I'd say it kind of depends on which way you want to go. If you're going to go with, which we kind of discussed this ourselves, if you kind of want to go with like an Eagle stack, Macklin's your guy. He's the guy you want to have there. Obviously you've got Sproles, you've got McCoy, but if you're looking at receivers, you really don't have a lot to work on. Jackson's gone, Macklin's healthy, Cooper won't eat into that too much. Take him. If you look at the Niners, it's kind of a toss-up between those two. And you've also got Vernon Davis, who weighs a lot more heavily into that passing game than what Ertz or Selleck may do for the Eagles. So you would really want to say Crabtree. Reports indicate that he is healthy, even though he has got the questionable designation. So it looks like he'll be good to go. But Bolden's also there as well. I like both of them this week. I think that's an effective two wide receiver stack in that situation, and not even just taking one wide receiver in the quarterback. But I think that it would be effective to take both wide receivers in that scenario. But if you're taking just a guy that you want to take a flyer on, I kind of like Hunter. I like Justin Hunter for the Titans. I think that it's a bit of a gamble, but he's a great red zone target, and he could easily find the end zone once, maybe twice against Kansas City, which by all indications, started out the season last year as a very stout defense, but really, really dropped off throughout the course of the season, and we don't know what we're going to see from them.
And they lost some good corners, too. I really like Hunter this season. I don't know if it's week one, but I hope it is. At 3,800, I'm willing to take the risk.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a big target. Locker's back, and he airs it up. So I really like Hunter. I almost like your value tier more than some of your other picks up here. I really like Eric Decker. I think he's going to have a TD. And I think Geno Smith is better than people give him credit for. So I like all three of your value tiers, and I'm going to try and work in at least one of those into my lineups this week. All right, so tight end. I ran the Jimmy Graham, Drew Brees stack quite a few times last year. It pays off usually, but people started playing Jimmy Graham a little bit differently towards the end of the year.
Right.
I still have him ranked number one. What are your thoughts on tight end?
Jimmy Graham, he's about as chalk gets for any player at any position in fantasy football. He's just so reliable. And you're right. It's such an effective combination. They've never really had. I mean, you've got Marcus Colston and now the newly acquired Brandon Cooks, which will kind of fill the Darren Sproles role there. And then of course we already talked about the running back situation, but Graham is really the premier target for him. So if you're looking for just somebody in that top tier, somebody that will definitely put up the points, he's your guy. Sure, Julius Thomas could put up the points, which I have him in tier 2, but my concern with Julius Thomas is that you have so many mouths to feed on that Denver offense that he's not so much a focal point as you have with Graham. Again, this kind of goes back to the stack. I like Ertz a lot this week. He's playing against a team that has typically given up a bunch of points to tight ends, so I like his role there in that offense, and I like what opportunity he has. And then another one this one's a little riskier, but Kyle Rudolph. Everybody's high on him this year. They're going to have to dump the ball off because they're most certainly going to be under duress from that Rams pass rush, so I anticipate him having a pretty decent week so long as Castle could stay upright long enough to get him the ball.
If you don't spend the money on Jimmy Graham this week, I think you have to go straight for a value pick with a tight end. And I think Zach Ertz is a great choice. I really like stacking the Eagles this week. Jacksonville gave up the third most fantasy points to QBs last year, and I think they're going to do it again this week. It's just a matter of who's going to get the TDs there and where things line up. But I like Zach Ertz, and another value play is Ladarius Green. I think he's at 3,200 or 3,500 on DraftKings, and Gates is still there. He's slowing down. They're working Ladarius Green into wide receiver sets. They're getting creative. He's getting a lot of plays on the field. I think he's at like 40 plays a game or something, so he's legitimate, and he's a legitimate choice for a value pick.
Yeah, I agree. I like him a lot. He's been a late round target for me in a lot of season long stuff that I did drafting. I like him a lot. I think that he's going to be a great guy to own, especially going forward. And really the only concern that I have there, which, again, if you're playing a 50-50, Ladarius Green's not your guy. You want somebody a little bit more, a little bit more chalk, somebody a little bit more reliable. But if you're playing in one of these GPPs, he's going to be a very contrarian pick. Probably not going to be a lot of people using him. And like you said, he's a great red zone target. Could easily find the end zone, and that could be what puts you over the top to get you a winning lineup.
All right. So moving down, you have quarterback at the bottom of your article. It seems like you don't value it as much. Is that just because it's a really deep position this year, or is that a GPP strategy?
That's more of a GPP strategy. I do think that it's a fairly deep position. I think that there's probably between 10 and 15 serviceable starters, depending on how you build the rest of your lineup this year, week in and week out. The biggest thing that it comes down to for me is I typically will look, and just like a season-long draft, oftentimes people will say they want to go running back first, wide receiver first, and look to quarterback later. I'm the same with my salary. I like to look at those skilled position players at running back and wide receiver, maybe see what the most effective stack would be if I'm looking for a stack, or maybe see if I've got value here and I can save some money here, then maybe I go for a guy like Drew Brees or Peyton Manning who's primed to have a humongous week against a favorable matchup, as they typically do. So that's why quarterback, to me, it's not that it's any less valuable a position than the rest of them. It's just that you can find value much deeper at quarterback than sometimes you can at the others when you're looking for one quarterback versus 2 or 3 running backs and wide receivers.
All right, so looking at your tier 1, I really like the Drew Brees matchup. I think that Atlanta's gotten some better players on defense, but they've had a rash of injuries, and Drew Brees always lights them up. I think he's throwing a lot. And I think that your numbers, 327 passing yards and 2 TDs, they could be low. I mean, he could put up 3 TDs, and he's cheaper than Peyton Manning. He could outscore him. So tier 1, do you also feel that Drew Brees is the must-have?
Yeah, I think so. Peyton Manning, not that he's going to have necessarily a bad week, but I feel a little more confident in the Indianapolis defense and the game plan that Indianapolis will have facing their former quarterback versus what you're going to have with Drew Brees. You're exactly right. And he really is just, when he's playing in a favorable situation, whether it be indoors or a warm climate, he's just unfazable, and he's going into a hostile Atlanta territory, but he's also going into a dome. So I think he's your guy to go with.
All right, tier 2, Nick Foles really stands out to me. I just think that he's a great stack this week with Macklin and Ertz, even Cooper if you want to throw him in there. Who do you like in tier 2?
I agree totally. I think Foles is the best value there. And when I say the best value, I don't mean salary-wise, but if you look at what his receivers go for, if you're trying to build a stack, you're going to be much better off than, say, Matt Ryan, who I have a couple positions lower. Matt Ryan, also talented quarterback, probably the best receiving core, one of the best receiving cores in the NFL, but you're also paying a lot of money to get Julio Jones and Roddy White versus what you're going to have to pay to get Macklin, Ertz, Riley Cooper, whoever you wanted to stack to go along with Foles. So I really think that tier 2, Foles is your guy, and amongst all the tiers, Foles may very well be the guy. I think he's the play of the week when it comes to quarterback. I think he's the guy you want to go with if you're building a stack.
All right. In your value tier, there's also a couple serviceable guys. I mean, all these guys you could stack and you could play, but who's your favorite out of your value tier?
I probably like Carson Palmer the most there. And the thing that sticks out to me, and especially this preseason, towards the end of last season, if you watch Carson Palmer, when he's got a clean pocket or he's got room and he's got a passing lane, he's great. And he was excellent towards the latter half from week 9 on of last season. So he had a really great end of the season last season, and when he's had a clean pocket this preseason, he's looked excellent. San Diego's got a really weak pass rush. I don't really anticipate that causing a problem for him, and I think that he just has a great week down there. That's probably, if you're building a stack and you're looking for a cheap quarterback, Carson Palmer would probably be the way to go that way if you wanted to steer clear of the 49ers or the Eagles, which you've already discussed.
I think that Michael Floyd's coming up. I think at one point he's going to take over Larry's number one position as the wide receiver on that team, and I agree. I think that having those two guys, they're going to surprise some people with passing yards this year. And
definitely, and that's another situation, that even though they're a bit more expensive, you can still manage to get. You'll have to be a little more creative with it, but you can still manage to stack Carson Palmer with Fitzgerald and Floyd, especially now that we've got the injury to Andre Ellington. If he's not playing, you can go real cheap on running back there and get a serviceable backup at Jonathan Dwyer to fill your void.
I really like Jonathan Dwyer. It's a bit of a risk, like we spoke about. They're playing on Monday. You don't know what's going to happen with Ellington, but it really seems like Ellington is going to sit this one out. And if he does, Jonathan Dwyer at 3,000. That's exactly the type of situation you want to look for in a GPP. A starting running back at $3,000, you're not going to do better than that. You know he's going to get the touches. So moving on, DraftKings got rid of the kicker position, so that just leaves the defense. You've got the Rams, Panthers, and Bengals. I think the Patriots should be mentioned somewhere here. I really feel like the Patriots are going to have a big year on defense with turnovers and with GPPs. A lot of times it comes down to scoring defenses, and Patriots can score. Having Darrelle Revis out there is going to open up a man, and for Belichick, having someone like Revis, I think he's going to wreak havoc. What is your pick this week in your defensive rankings?
I do like the Patriots as well. The only reason that I kept the Patriots out of the rankings were because they were $300 to $400 more than most of those other picks. Patriots are currently coming in at $3,600 on DraftKings, which it's not an exorbitant amount to pay for them. And I agree, they're going to have a great week and possibly a great season. Especially, you lose Talib, you replace him with Revis, and I mean, I don't think anybody would say that that's probably not a pretty good upgrade there. So. The thing with me, what does it for me is the Rams. They've got such a great matchup. Minnesota, yes, you've got Adrian Peterson, but I think that they're going to just tear apart that offense. I think that they're going to just be all over the quarterback. I think the sacks are going to be what's really going to carry you, possibly interceptions. So that's, to me, this cheap, you're really not going to find a better deal, in my opinion, this week than the Rams.
You know you're going to get the pass rush. You know there's some opportunities for some sack fumbles that can turn into TDs. I agree the Rams are an up-and-coming defense. We'll have to see what they do against the run. They're superior on the pass rush. So anyway, I think it's a good pick. And that concludes our weekly money picks by Mully. Once again, you can check out those picks on fantasyfootballmoneyleague.com. And we'll see you next week. Take care, Jason.
Hey, you too. Thanks, Sam.